Hi everyone, and welcome to our continuing look at attention. I want to turn now to attention and perceptual blindness, in quotes. This is not a literal blindness, but you can see it's going to be affecting our ability to perceive. I want to start off with a phenomenon called inattentional blindness. In this phenomenon, you have access to a visual stimulus, that is, it is falling on your retina, but strangely, it is not perceived. This is called a looked but didn't see problem. I know those words look and see seem synonymous, but you can look at something and not be aware of it. A classic study done by Mack and Rock. In this study, people were briefly shown a cross, and the task for participants was simply to answer this as quickly as possible. Which is the longer arm of the cross, the horizontal line or the vertical line? That's what they thought the experiment was all about. But at one point, during what's called a critical trial, a small geometrical shape was also presented in the display. After that was finished, people were asked what the shape was. So here are examples. On the left is a regular trial. Which line is longer? I'm going to say the vertical line looks like. And people would do this several times, and then, randomly, there would be an inattention trial. A shape appears, and then people were asked which shape actually appeared. Results? 25% correct. How perfect is that? That is, of course, chance level. People were guessing. Even though that triangle is definitely falling on people's retinas, they did not have any conscious perception of it. We can't even say, well, maybe it's affecting their subconscious, because when they're doing the recognition test, wouldn't the subconscious kind of hint to you, like tap you on your shoulder, hey, psst, pick the triangle, pick the triangle. I don't know why I picked the triangle, I just felt like it. No, that's not even working. There is no perception without attention. That's what this study is telling us. Now, there have been many other studies that have also tried to show the same thing. This is one of the most famous, by Dan Simons and Chris Chabris. In this study, people watched a video with two teams or squads of 3 people playing basketball. One squad was wearing white shirts, the other squad was wearing black shirts. And this was the task for the participants to count how many times the players who were wearing the white shirts successfully passed the basketball. Now, if by some miracle you haven't seen this before, I have a link to it. So stop this video, please. Go back to eClass. There'll be a link to this. You can watch this. I'd love to embed this here, but it is copyright. And if I embed it into this video, YouTube is going to block it, and then nobody can see anything. So please go and watch the video. It is going to be important for what happens next. I'm assuming that you watched the video. So what were the results? How many times did the play? I don't know. Here's the most important thing, though. About half of people missed the gorilla. So again, something you would think would be incredibly salient, something so weird and different, you'd think that would capture people's attention. No. There have been follow-ups to this, kind of interesting twists. Here's one of my favorites from 2010. In this case, they observed people who didn't know they were even in an experiment, and this is partly why I love this. So a total of 151 college students walking across a quad at their university. Now, Hyman knew someone who was a clown. Now, I'm not calling people's names. That person was actually a clown. This was a thing that they did. They would dress in a purple and yellow clown costume with polka dot sleeves, red shoes, and a red nose, and they would ride around the quad. Helpfully, they included a picture of what that looked like. Okay. Now, what they did in this study was they asked the unwitting participants if they remembered seeing the clown. And here's what they found. Now, you've got people doing all kinds of different things as they're walking through the quad. There might be 2 people, and they're having a conversation as they walk. 71% of them reported that they did see the clown. Someone walking without distraction. so they're not looking at their phone or anything, they're just walking, it's about a 50% chance if they're going to notice the clown. Listening to music, so they've got earbuds in, 60% saw the clown. And I love the last one, people who were talking on a cell phone, only 25% saw the clown. You'd think you'd notice a clown unicycling around you. In some cases, the clown actually did take his unicycle and actually annoyingly go around people, like literally circling around them, and that did not influence whether or not they noticed the clown. Again, this tells us the same thing. If you're not paying attention, you're not perceiving. Here's another example of something slightly different. This is a game called Counterfeit. Are these two pictures identical? Are they absolutely identical in every possible way? At first glance, you might say, yes, of course. But no, this is one of those find the differences challenges. There is one difference between these two pictures. And you know what? I'm not going to tell you. I had to look at this, and I looked at it for a really, really long time until I found out what the difference actually was. You can freeze frame this and stare at this, have fun. Don't spend more than, 2 or 3 hours trying to find it. If you can't get it, post a message to the discussion forum and maybe someone will help you out. If you love being frustrated a lot, hit this URL and you can play this game until you just want to rip your hair out. Why is that so hard to find the difference? Okay, this is an example of another phenomenon called change blindness. Now, in this case, there was a change, or that is a difference between those two, but it's actually surprisingly hard to find. We have the naive belief that we have access to the entire visual image and we are processing everything in it. If that were the case, that kind of a challenge would be trivial. It wouldn't be difficult at all. Again, there are examples in the literature of change blindness. Here's, again, a classic. People were brought into a lab, and they were only told to pay close attention to a video of people having a conversation. And that's all they were told. I have a link to that. Please watch the conversation video, and then come back. Assuming you've watched the video, did you notice anything funny happening? Any weird things? Any continuity errors, as they call them in the movie and TV business, when the edit goes from one cut to another? So there are some things that did change. Did you get any of these? The scarf on the one woman disappears in one shot and then reappears in another shot. The color of the plates changes. The garbage, was it garbage or food? I couldn't tell the difference. It moves from one person's plate to the other. The hand position of the woman on the left changes. Sometimes it's on her face, sometimes it's not. These are the ones that I found. Now, if you didn't get any of these, don't feel badly. Only about 1 in 10 people, so 10%, noticed any of the changes. Wow, it looks like detecting change is pretty hard. Now, this led to a follow-up the next year, which is called the Door Study. Again, I have some videos for you to watch. Watch video number 1. And when you do, pay close attention to the professorly-looking gentleman. He is unwitting in this. He does not know what's happening. And then there is a follow-up. Now, they did do a couple of versions of this because their hypothesis was that older people are going to be more likely to be fooled than younger people. But as you'll see in video number 2, the young woman is likewise fooled. So in line with the previous studies with gorillas and whatnot, only about half of people noticed a change in the human being that was in front of them. Now, the changes have been found to be local or global. Doesn't really make a difference. Local would mean there's a person who comes up to you and asks you for directions and they have a mustache. and then suddenly they don't have a mustache. That's a local change. A global change would mean replacing one human being with another human being. Changes can be fast or slow. So in these studies, the changes were fast. You can also get video and you can manipulate it, and you show people a static image, and then there's something in there that gradually fades away and disappears. Like it's a landscape and there's maybe a bush that gradually disappears. And if it happens slowly enough, again, people are not going to notice that it's disappeared, or maybe a new bush has appeared. Now, that's not to say that people are completely oblivious. People do tend to notice things like a male turning into a female or vice versa, a change in the apparent race or skin color of a person or a social group. So someone who is kind of dressed shabby like a homeless person, and then suddenly, oh, boom, they're in a three-piece suit. People will notice some changes. I don't want to, again, lose the forest for the trees here. What is all of this blindness stuff telling us about perception? Even though we might get information landing on our rods and our cones, that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to process it and be aware of it. It further emphasizes that attention is limited. We are not processing everything that is available to our senses, but only a small fraction of it. Specifically, a lot of this does relate to vision. Visual encoding is highly selective or sparse. So we can actually learn quite a bit about perception from its absence in these cases of perceptual blindness. Next, I want to turn to a theoretical problem called the binding problem. It is not a practical problem. It is a theoretical problem. By that I mean it's really, really hard to explain how this happens. Now, we know it happens. Your brain processes information from one stimulus in parallel. I talked about area V4, which processes color, V5, which processes motion, but unless you have a certain form of brain damage, when you look at an object like a bird flying past, you don't see its shape as separate from its color, as separate from its motion. All of those properties are bound together into a holistic percept. So we know this happens, but how do those separate brain areas come together to create this holistic experience? Now, this is a pretty thorny theoretical problem. I admit I'm going to be vastly oversimplifying it. There are some proposed solutions, and I'll talk about two major ones coming up in a second. So the question is, again, how do we go from these separate brain modules and stitching, fusing, or binding things together into a holistic percept? Well, let's first go to Hubel and Wiesel, who were there first before a lot of people. They were the ones who discovered the simple, complex, and end-stopped cells. Now, they realized that the binding problem was a problem, and their solution is called convergence. It's a fairly simple kind of solution. Their idea is that the neurons in the different modules or networks will literally converge. They will come together to cause an individual neuron to fire. So one neuron might be activated by the color red, another neuron activated by a circular shape. Those two neurons project onto another neuron, and that neuron is only going to fire when there is a red circle present. That's what I mean by a particular combination. And we can kind of go kind of crazy and take this to its logical extreme, and we end up with the grandmother cell theory, that you have one cell in your brain that will fire when you see your grandmother. Doesn't matter if you see her from the side, from the front, from the top, or whatever, this neuron is going to be activated only by your grandmother. It's very simple, straightforward, very appealing, very intuitive. Here are the problems. I'm really generous when I say little evidence. There's actually no evidence for it, so it's a hypothetical idea. Secondly, there are so many objects that we can recognize and perceive. If you can see a tree or a person or anything, literally anything, that means that that object has activated the one neuron in your brain activated by that thing. What if you go into the forest and you look at a tree that you've never seen before, a completely different tree? Well, if you can see it, that means that you've got a neuron in your head for that particular tree of that shape and size and color and everything. That seems implausible, if not completely impossible. And then finally, how do these neurons learn to fire to your grandmother? How does that happen? How does the learning take place if there's a novel object? Have we got a neuron set aside to fire to literally any possible object in the universe? That seems incredibly implausible. So this idea is really not supported, but okay, now we need to seek out something else, something to replace it. One of the best candidates is an idea called temporal synchrony. According to this, the neurons don't have to come together. Neurons will fire at the same time because they're all processing different aspects of that same object. Now, if there are different objects, this is going to throw off the synchronization. So let me kind of explain what we're looking at here. In the left display, there's one big, long vertical bar, and it's moving to the left through two receptive fields. Now, the idea of temporal synchrony says that both of these receptive fields are going to be synchronized together. And there's a very nice, beautiful pattern of activity here that represents, these two receptive fields are agreeing that they're looking at the same object. In this case here in the middle, very similar case, but it's actually two separate objects. There's a bit of a gap between them, but they're both moving over to the left. So very similar kind of a thing. We see, again, some synchronization, but the pattern isn't identical to the one on the left. Now, in the case on the right, again, we have two vertical bars, but now they're simultaneously moving in opposite directions. And here you can see there's no synchronization. It is a flat line. So our visual system is interpreting this as, these aren't the same thing. These are two completely different things. Now, this is a bit more difficult, a bit more complex, a bit harder to kind of wrap your arms around. Any object is represented in our mind by a distributed representation. It's not as simple as, there's a neuron that's firing. That would be a version of specificity in terms of neural coding. This is a bit more complex. The brain is representing an object by different neurons firing different locations in the brain, but they are synchronized, and that is the important key to all of this. But then, how do we get synchronization to happen? Does it happen by itself? No, it doesn't. There are so many potential objects in your visual field. How do you get things synchronized? So this idea only works with the help of attention. Attention is kind of the glue that synchronizes neural firing. So when you pay attention to a stimulus, that will synchronize the neural firing processing the object that you are paying attention to. Again, this is a vast oversimplification. There's a lot more to it, but I wanted to give you the basic idea behind that. Now, there is another idea that talks about visual attention, and it has received a lot of attention over the years. That was not a pun. I don't make puns. It's called feature integration theory, proposed by Anne Treisman. So in some papers in the 1980s, they outlined this theory of visual attention. Treisman, who died in 2018, won the Groemeyer Award in Psychology in 2009. That's one of the highest honors that is specifically for psychology. To really summarize this, feature integration theory says that your attention has to focus on a particular stimulus or parts in space in order to create a mental representation or percept. So again, it's saying that you cannot perceive anything without attention. But instead of leaving it kind of vague and loosey-goosey like that, it explains specifically the underlying processes. So according to Treisman, there are two stages of processing. Stage one is called the pre-attentive stage, and that means, well, yes, literally before your attention. Now, this stage occurs automatically. It requires no effort on your part whatsoever. You open your eyes, all the light floods into your eye, and your visual system starts to process that information. It decomposes stimuli into basic properties. And the term that Treisman coined for this was primitives. That is her term for this. Now, the processing here is in parallel. All the light is coming into your eye, your rods and cones. They can fire in parallel. It's not a serial stage. But wait, we're not aware of anything yet. Stage 1 is somewhere early in the visual system. Stage 2 is now where attention comes in. It's called the focused attention stage. This stage is serial. What you'll do, whether you realize it or not, is select a location in space. Now, when you select that location, you are directing your attention to it, either overt or covert. When you do that, all of the primitives that exist at that location in space are kind of gathered together and then combined together. Maybe they are binded or bound together. So for example, at one location in space, there might be the property of the color of redness, and then another property having the shape of an X. When your attention focuses on that location, it combines those two properties together into a red X. And now you experience a red X. You see it in your mind's eye. Now this product is called an object file. It exists temporarily. So after you look away from the red X and you move your eyes somewhere else, all of those primitives kind of fall apart again. Now your attention is on another location and you're going to combine the primitives together at this new location. Why would you be selecting different locations and combining primitives together? So this theory goes really hand in hand with the experimental paradigm that they developed called visual search. In a visual search experiment, what you're going to do is look for a target in a display. So this allows manipulation of lots of things and control of lots of things. It is an experimental paradigm. The task for the observer is to find a target. Yeah, so you're typically told, we want you to say if this target is present in the display, yes or no. This is made more difficult because there are non-targets or distractors present. So again, making it as simple as possible, does the display have this target, yes or no? And typically people will press a button, one for yes, one for no, as quickly as possible. This will measure RT, which is reaction time, and errors. We want people to go as fast as possible, which means occasionally they're going to make an error. If they make errors about 10% of the time, we're not going to worry about it. Again, we really want people to go as fast as possible. If only there was some way I could get you to try this. All right, you know what? I'm going to. So I'm going to present a number of displays, and I'm going to make this even more difficult for you. I'm not going to tell you what the target is. Okay, so I want everybody to start from the same location. Fixate on this cross. In a moment, this is going to be replaced by a display. See if you can find the target. And you can say yes out loud or silently as quickly as possible. If there is no unique target, say no. Ready? Hopefully you found it. If you haven't, you might want to pause the video. Of course, there is one that's different. The target is a Q among O's. Okay, so not too difficult. Let's try this again. Ready? Get set. Giving you a bit more time here because you're frantically looking for it. No, the answer is no. There is no unique target here. It's all the letter O. Just want to keep you honest. Okay, once again, is there one unique target? Yes or no? Ready? And the answer is yes. It's down here. Now this, compared to the first Q among O's I showed you, you might expect it to be a lot more difficult because I literally doubled the number of O's. But you know what? I don't think this is particularly more difficult. Here's some more. Ready? Get set? And the answer is yes. Again, this is a bit challenging because the T is made up of the same components as the L, just kind of rearranged a bit. Here's another. Ready? Get set? Now, some smart Alecs are going to say, oh no, they're all the letter L. You know what? What is your eye telling you? Your eyes are telling you this one is different. Yeah, it's tilted. Another one for you. Ready? Get set? And if you have severe color blindness, this is not fair because there is a red P here. You're doing pretty good on these. And I don't even know exactly how you're doing. But I know that you're doing pretty good on these. All right. I want you to try another one. Ready? I think you should pause the video because you are going to take a long time to look through all of this. Holy cow, this is pretty darn hard. I don't think there's a unique target. No, there's not. The correct answer here is no. Again, I want to keep you honest, people. Let's try one more. Ready? Now this one too might take you a little while. It is pretty difficult, and I've made this one really the most difficult of all. And yes, there is one unique target, and it is right here. It's the R. It's really hard because it has a lot in common with the P, but it also has the leg in common with the Q. So it's got components from both the P's and the Q's, so this is actually really hard to find. I feel bad that this one was so hard, so I'm going to give you one bonus one. Ready, get set. Where's Waldo? Oh, you know what? I really should have prepared myself. Where the heck is Waldo? To be honest, I don't even know if he's here. Okay, so those were some examples of visual search in which you direct your attention to try to find a target. Now we can break down visual search into basically three major types. The first one is called feature search. Now the target is defined by having a property or primitive that none of the non-targets have. So for example, find a green 2 among red 2s. If you have green, red, color blindness, I'm sorry, it's going to be very difficult for you. Yes, there is a green 2. This is a trivial kind of feature search. It just happens instantaneously. You don't have to look around. Where is that green 2? I can't. No, it's like your eye is telling you, like, look here. Here it is. And it's really, really fast. Second type is called a conjunction search. Conjunction here refers to the operator and. So the target is defined by having one property and another property. The thing is, some of the non-targets have one property, other of the non-targets have the other property. So find a green 5 among green and red 2s and red 5s. Get it? So look for a green 5. And now this is a little bit harder. Okay, but there is one and only one green 5 here. It takes you a little bit longer. You do have to kind of look around a little bit to try and find it. Finally, the third type is the spatial configuration search. So the target now is all about its organization of features. I know that's kind of vague. The example is finding a 5 among 2s. Okay, so yes, it is there, and again, you have to look around a little bit until you can find the 5. Now, the 5 has the same number of lines, vertical and horizontal, as the 2, exactly the same number and type of angles as the 2. It's all about the spatial arrangement or configuration for this. So this, too, is a pretty challenging search. Now, going back to feature search, that one is different. It is unique because of a phenomenon that it produces. It's called, and I'm serious, it's called, seriously, pop-out. Yep, because you look at the display and the target just pops out at you. You don't have to look around for it. So according to the definition, the time needed to find the target is very short. It can even be constant, and that means even as we increase the number of distractors, it does not increase the reaction time. That was like the Q among the O's. I doubled the distractors, but I don't think that had any effect on the reaction time at all. That pop-out time was constant. What causes pop-out? Primitives. The target has primitives that none of the distractors have. So this helps us actually to define what a primitive is. it is something that gives rise to pop-out. This is not a complete list, but it includes things like color, brightness, orientation, length, curvature, the size of a stimulus. All of these can define what the primitives are. So really, feature integration theory and visual search, those two things really have gone hand in hand. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let's evaluate feature integration theory, looking at its pros and cons. On the plus side, there is evidence that supports it. Some of the best evidence comes from a phenomenon called illusory conjunctions, something I mentioned in the previous video. This happens when your attentional resources are overtaxed. You don't have enough left over. What happens is that primitives from different locations accidentally get combined. Now you can induce this experimentally pretty easily, have people do a visual search task while they're also maybe listening to a story in headphones. So they are very different kinds of tasks, but still, the listening task is going to draw resources away from doing what is otherwise a pretty easy task, the visual search. So with the illusory correlation, the funny thing is, people will perceive, for example, a blue X in a display that doesn't have any blue X's. It has red X's, it has blue O's, but under the right conditions, people will experience seeing a blue X, and they will see that in their mind's eye. The only problem is it wasn't actually physically present. Kind of a weird thing. Now, you might not even believe that this can happen unless you do some visual search task. How could I possibly get you to do a visual search? Oh, that's right, the online labs. But here in the lecture, the example that I go to is the closest thing that I can get to inducing an illusory conjunction, and it's the Stroop effect, the classic good old Stroop effect. In the Stroop effect, what you've got to do is say the color of a stimulus, no matter what the stimulus is. If you've never experienced this before, oh, you're in for a treat. Now, when you hear the word Stroop, if you're like me, the first thing you think of is Stroopwafels? Look, that's the first thing I think of. Literally, that's the first thing I think of. Delicious, delicious Stroopwafels. But no, we're not going to be eating Stroopwafels. What we're going to do is an experiment. On the screen, I'm going to show you one column of stimuli, and what you need to do as quickly as possible, out loud or silently, is say the name of the color, starting at the top, working down to the bottom. Now, there aren't weird colors like puce and chartreuse and teal. No, they're just your basic color names, okay? So, I want you to say them either out loud or silently to yourself, top to bottom, as quickly as possible. Okay, hopefully you were able to do it in that time, because I did it silently in my head. If I'm done, then all of you young'uns must have been long done. Okay, so it's not too hard. Let's try another one. Again, a column of stimuli, top to bottom. Ready? Hopefully you've been done for quite a few seconds already, okay? And you're probably thinking to yourself, there's nothing to this. This is pretty darn easy. Okay, it's going to get harder. Okay, so once again, here are some stimuli. Again, top to bottom, quickly as possible. Ready? I think that was a little bit more challenging. Again, the task is to say the colors that you see, not to read the words. You have to turn off the part of your brain that wants to read the words, because people, truck is not a color. Hey, what color is your truck? Truck. No, see, that doesn't work. Okay, so now you're all warmed up. You kind of know what this is all about. I'm going to give you one last chance. Again, tell me what colors you see. Ready? Get set. And I'm done. Man, that took me a long time. You were probably done like 2 minutes ago. Whew, okay. The problem here is that you have to turn off an automatic process, and what you might do is do that successfully. You'll say blue, green, green, black, green, oops, and then you have to kind of start over again. Yeah. Again, this is kind of the closest I can get to an illusory conjunction outside of experimental situations. There are some downsides to feature integration theory. Here's a weird one. It's subject to a practice effect. By definition, conjunction search is slower than a feature search. But if you practice doing a certain kind of conjunction search over and 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 over again, it's like an hour a day for like a month, your conjunction search will show pop out. You can train yourself to get almost anything to pop out. But how is that possible? How are you getting pop out? According to Treisman, pop out is caused by primitives which are processed at a low level. It shouldn't matter if you practiced or not. This is a bit of a problem for feature integration theory. And once again, the suggestion is that attention is required for perception. You cannot perceive anything that you're not paying attention to. But this leads to a whole bunch of other questions too. So let's say you're paying attention to this screen and then someone in your house is calling you. How do you know they're calling you? You're not paying attention to it yet. How can you be aware of it before you pay attention to it? It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. It's a bit mind-bending. It's like that movie Tenet. That movie made me question my existence. So how can you shift your attention to a new stimulus if you're not aware that it even exists yet? And then what about cases of brain damage if you're thinking back to something like blind sight? People can perceive things without awareness. They can say which direction a moving line is moving, even though they do not have any subjective impression of seeing. Yeah, lots of questions. I don't have the answers to these. Here's a summary of the things that we've seen kind of up to this point in the course. Not absolutely everything, but some of the major highlights. Clearly, our eyes are not like cameras. Unbelievably, at one point in time, that was kind of state-of-the-art for vision science. Your eyes are like cameras, and they're sending information back to your brain, which is kind of like a screen. No. It's not how it works. Your eyes are starting to process the visual scene, center, surround, receptive fields, detecting contrast and edges. What happens is a decomposition. The scene that you're looking at, whether you realize it or not, is decomposed. First of all, the image lands on your retina, and that visual scene is shattered apart into 130 million tiny little bits. And now the parts have to get analyzed kind of from the ground up, looking at intensity, trying to reassemble edges, and then reassembling objects from that. We have seen that different things like form, motion, location, color are processed in different areas of the brain in parallel. And then, somehow, before it reaches our perception, our perceptual awareness, all those different aspects have to be reintegrated, synthesized, integrated, binded, or bound together. Other things that I've tried to point out, mostly my kind of framing here has been, let's track the information as it enters the eye and goes deeper and deeper into the visual system. That is a feed-forward look at things, a lot of bottom-up processing. But we also know there are a lot of feedback connections. There is top-down processing happening as well. We don't understand that to the same degree. It's probably a bit harder to grasp that. We might even need some new technologies in order to be able to map exactly all of the connections that are sending feedback. And then most recently, I've showed you that attention does seem to be required for further processing. I have a link to a video that you might like to watch because it does bring a lot of these things alive. I've simply described them to you in this video. They actually go to people who suffer from some of these forms of brain damage, things like neglect, and it's kind of interesting to see the process actually unfolding and these people talking about it in their own words. It is about an hour long or so, but I think it is kind of useful to check that out. And then when you're done that, be sure to answer the E-Class lecture quiz.